Right, and I think we are finally live. Hello, everybody, and welcome to Forever Rugby on Forever Sports. A little bit delayed, my fault, a couple of technical difficulties, so we are about 30 minutes late. But I am here. Lukhanyo is here, and we're going to be chatting about the Rainbow Cup, which has finally been confirmed after months of sort of Super Rugby Unlocked and now a preparation series. And we were kind of assuming we were preparing for the Rainbow Cup. We didn't have any confirmation on fixtures or what was going to work. But we do finally have confirmation on what is going on. And I think it's going to be quite an interesting tournament, even though it's not quite going to be that sort of long, lots of traveling, lots of different sort of sides. I mean, all the South African sides are going to be playing against each other and stuff like that, which isn't great. But I think it should be quite a cool tournament. But yeah, basically for the sort of the next hour, we're going to be talking about what we thought about the preparation series, where we think each squad is, what sort of are sort of the major aspects we have to work on and stuff like that. If you have any questions or anything you want us to chat about, please chuck them in the comments so we can get to that as well. But I think we'll start with the preparation series. Chongs, what did you think of the 5 sort of weeks we had of rugby? A lot of B teams, a lot of sort of fringe players. But what did you make of the whole sort of preparation series?
Sure. Firstly, thanks, Steve, for having me. Greetings to everyone who will be joined. But yeah, I think there's been a lot of we've gotten a chance to see sort of the depth, sort of the squad, who's there, what the teams have, and I think at times we've actually seen very good rugby. Considering that even the players that have been playing now, some of them are players that wouldn't have gotten a lot of game time come Super Rugby Unlock. So to get them playing again after such a long time, so there's some teams that have shown very good promise, but equally, obviously, our local favorite team, unfortunately, hasn't stepped up to the party. But I think just generally speaking, I think it's been quite quality rugby. And I think now we're seeing more of the sort of Springbok first team choice players coming into the sides. And that has sort of, raised the level of rugby up a notch. So I'm excited to see what the sort of next couple of weeks have in store, and obviously then spilling over into the Rainbow Cup.
And was there any particular team for you that stood out that managed to not necessarily play the best, I suppose, but managed to use the sort of period the most effectively in terms of being able to look at their entire squad and be able to get the balance right between rotating players and giving other players a chance?
Sure. Yeah, I think there are two sides that I've sort of, I think I've used this time effectively, if I put it that way. I think the Cheetahs, again, it's unfortunate that they won't be participating in the Rainbow Cup because they're looking like a proper side, a lot of depth, a lot of very good players in that side that it's going to be a pity to see them fall off, right? Especially considering with the British and Irish Lions tour coming, especially when we're speaking of our sort of SAA and that sort of sides, you'd imagine a lot of players will be coming out of the Cheetah. So it's a bit worrisome that they aren't in like the Rainbow Cup. It's going to be interesting to see what happens to them. And I think the Blue Bulls have actually also unearthed and given an opportunity to their youngsters, which has been fantastic to see because obviously they won the junior trophies. So it's nice to see them step up and actually showcase their ability at, a pro level, at the national level.
Yeah, I mean, what I was saying in my sort of wrap up of the preparation series that it's so vital that we need to decide what's going to happen with your sort of second tier sides.
Sure.
In terms of a second competition, and we need to make sure that the Chiefs are playing a higher brand of rugby. Because I mean, talks about them joining a team in Russia, a team in the States. Money wise, maybe it could be a thing, but I mean, if you want somebody like France Steyn to be involved in the Springboks, and you want, let's say, an Andise and Sile, a couple of these players who are good enough to make the step up for the Springboks, it must be worrying for Rassie Erasmus to be sitting there saying, right, well, they're playing rugby, but they're not playing at the highest sort of standard.
Yeah.
Even players playing in Japan, they're playing, but they're not necessarily playing the same level as those playing in the top 40 in the Premiership.
Sure.
So, I mean, it has to be an SA Rugby sort of immediate concern to make sure that the Cheetahs, Pumas, Griquas, EP, for whatever they're going to do, are playing at a reasonably high standard of rugby for more than just the Currie Cup. Because at the moment, they pretty much don't play any rugby. Come to the Currie Cup, they're so out of depth. compared to other sides, they can't compete, and then they sort of go back into this limbo.
100%. 100%. Yeah, it's going to be vital, and I think it's important that we also have a local league going at the same time, right? Because the unfortunate thing is we need to also ensure that we're getting as many of our rugby players playing again. And if we want to actually have a decent series against the Lions, I think it's not players just sitting and being picked on reputation. They need to be actually getting the game time in their legs and actually playing. So hopefully after the preparation series, while the Rainbow Cup is going on, we can see, I don't know, like a super sports sort of challenge. Obviously, it's not of a Pro 14 or Rainbow Cup standard, but I think it will do our players, our guys, that much good. Because as you said, the unfortunate thing is these smaller unions aren't playing rugby throughout the year. Then they have to go play a Currie Cup against sides who've played, rugby throughout the year. And already, in terms of talent-wise, there's a gap, but now you further stretch that gap by them only playing for a couple of months as compared to sort of the other bigger unions. So it's something that definitely SA Rugby needs to look at, and look at it pretty quickly, in my opinion.
Yeah, I mean, and I mean, what's been quite interesting in the sort of Six Nations is you've got England, who dominated Six Nations last year, World Cup finals 2019, coming fifth in the Six Nations now, and there's been a big sort of talk about the fact that one of the main reasons that they struggled so much is that they picked a lot of players on reputation rather than form. Yeah. And you look at all the Saracens players who are just not playing rugby because they've been relegated.
Yeah.
And how that kind of translated into the Six Nations. Your likes of Owen Farrell, Maury Toje, a lot of these players struggling because they just haven't had game time.
Yeah.
So I think, and what I was saying is at the moment, the sad reality is that apart from France Day, who's already part of the setup, I don't think you make the Springboks from the Cheetahs at the moment.
Yeah.
I think that's the reality, because they could have a super sport challenge, and you could have somebody, let's say Open Mohoja is playing out of the socks week in, week out, performing at a high level. At the end of the day, you're going to sit there and say, yeah, but he's doing it against the Pumas. He's doing it against the Griquas, which you might say somebody like Vincent Jatuka, maybe if you look at the same position, maybe he's not sort of outperforming as much in terms of reflected, but you're going to sit there saying, well, he's playing against better players and he still seems to be doing all right. So I'm going to go with him because he's performing well at a high standard of rugby compared to somebody who might be more of a stand-up but playing at a lower standard of rugby.
Sure, 100%. 100%. Yeah, that's it. I mean, we've got a practical example with England, as you said. There is no substitute for game time. That's something that you'll hear in any team sport. It's about getting the players out there, getting them to play, because that's how then you gain that fitness. That's how you also get that synergy between players, and then you're able to play the sort of brand of rugby that you're trying to play. So without that, definitely it becomes a massive issue for your national team as well.
Yeah, I just think not that we've got a small pipeline, but I just think it's just so frustrating when you think of the amount of the amount of professional players the amount of professional South African players across the world, and yet unless you're playing in Europe, you're not making the Springboks unless you're playing for the top four sides in South Africa. And it's you look at, like, I always sort of go back to the football example, and you think of like a team like the England football side. They are drawing players across 6, 7, 8 sides in England. Whereas at the moment, you could be the best on form inside centre in the country, but if you're playing for the Pumas, you're not getting called up for the Springboks.
100%.
And they're so it's almost like when they play, they're not playing to get called up for the Springboks. They're playing to try and get picked for a Rainbow Cup side. Maybe they're going to try and play for a loan or play for a move to a higher union to then try and put themselves on the block radar. And I think ideally we want to be in a situation where we've got a Currie Cup, which is 7, 8 teams, all of a high standard of rugby, where you can actually use that and say, right, well, we've got 7, 8 teams. We've got that player who's playing really well in the Pumas. He's actually worth bringing into the Springbok setup. Because how many players do you think we lose to within the system? You always talk about players that get lost within the system because sometimes it gets a bit limited. If you don't have that opportunity, you don't make it at the Lions, you don't make it at the Bulls. And there's always been that sort of sometimes a bit of bias. It took a long time before sort of Lions players were being picked because they were always such a poor side. And then obviously they had a couple of years and suddenly they were all being picked. So
Sure.
there's always that sort of provincial franchise bias.
Yeah, and it's something that we generally have to just read again and again. It goes back to what we've spoken about even in previous chats, just us finding a way to sort of broaden. And I think we need to sort of try, maybe not move away from the franchise system entirely, but maybe not make it like rooted in unions. It can be region rather than union specific. And then we have a second competition that is, that is strong, that is similar system to New Zealand, where they've got the Mitre 10, right, where you've got your different provinces, your Otagos, Auckland, whatever, those sort of sides. But equally for Super Rugby, then what they did is they had a franchise system where you only got a couple of franchises, but they're equally scattered around the country, and I think we need to sort of start thinking that way. But yeah, it's something that they say rugby needs to take up, because as you said, we've got massive talent and we're constantly losing massive talent to overseas because we don't have a strong sort of second layer tournament team structure, which is unfortunate. Obviously, you'll rather than move to Europe than play for Griquas, unfortunately.
No, exactly, and that's the thing. I mean, people keep saying, look at Duan van der Merwe, look at CJ Stander. They weren't picked for this reason, for that reason. I think at the end of the day, you want to be the eighth man for the Springboks. You've got four sides,
Sure.
And if you're not the starting eighth man at the Sharks, you're not the starting eighth man at the Lions or the Bulls or the Stormers. You are not making it unless you go overseas. And look, now I think we're starting to sort of pick more players based overseas. So maybe that'll sort of stop the CJ Standards and the Duan van der Merwe. But it becomes so difficult. It's just so limited. Your opportunities are so limited.
Sure.
In only having sort of four sides.
Yeah, and unfortunately, that also then has an impact in terms of the development structures within even the bigger unions, because it's all well and good to have a strong 23, right? But if you want to be winning championships and, forming sort of that legendary franchise union, you need depth, right? Now, what you find is there's a massive gap between your first choice players, so your first squad, and also then the rest of your squad when you have that middle layer of players leaving and opting to go overseas, which in the long run, yes, now we're fortunate in that we are picking guys from overseas, but in terms of the development, in terms of the youngsters, I mean, it would be massive if Faf was still in South Africa, for example, playing at the Lions hypothetically, because the knock-on effect that has in terms of the experience he brings to the Lions franchise, for example, and the filtering down of the talent, he can easily work with the youngsters as well. It's massive, and we're losing all that knowledge to overseas. And we've seen how competitive the Six Nation has become now, because just generally Europe, where those players are playing, because they've got quality around them, that's how Japan's rugby has also just skyrocketed in terms of the national side. They are able to attract all these quality players that lift the standards in terms of preparation, practice, that ultimately then also pushes the players that much further, which then obviously improves generally the rugby and the development of the game within those regions.
Yeah, I mean, it's been a massive issue. I mean, I think being a Lions supporter, we've kind of seen it in many ways the most. That we had, have such a good team, and then within like the space of 2-3 years, all these players leave, and you kind of continue. So it's almost like you're continuously building. You're always building.
Yeah.
I mean, the Lions are currently doing a rebuild, but I mean, we were doing a rebuild in sort of 13-14, 14-15. You don't really want to be doing a rebuild every 3 years,
100%.
So you finally sort of get a side together, and then they all leave. And you get a side together, and then they all leave.
Yeah.
So look, hopefully going to Europe will mean there's more money in the bank, more money in the pockets, and we can try and pay our players better and try and sort of keep them more in the country. But that it definitely is a major issue that whilst they might be coming back for the Springboks, we are losing that sort of the extra stuff, I mean, I can't imagine the amount of experience that, I mean, what's been learned from somebody like Duane Vermeulen being at the Bulls, when you've got young players, your Albert Lowe's, coming through and being able to learn something from Duane Vermeulen. He's been there, he's done that, he's now won a World Cup. You want players like Marcel Coetzee coming back and having all that experience and being able to say, right, this is what has been there. But I look at the Lions and you think, well, Willem Albert's come back and UPC's come back. But apart from those two, maybe like an Alton Yankees, there's nobody there that can sit there saying, well, we've been there. We've played World Cups. This is how you do it. This is how you learn. This is how you can become a Springbok. It's all these players trying to find their way in a career in a situation where a lot of them haven't been. 100%. So I think it's a very good point that we lose out a lot of the off the ball, not necessarily just with their performances, but a lot of off their sort of stuff part.
Yeah.
So it's definitely a big issue. But in terms of the Rainbow Cup, and I'm looking towards what's going to be a bit of a predecessor to a Pro 16 or whatever the tournament's going to be.
Yeah.
What do you think is going to be the main challenges for all the sides now going to Europe? You've been playing Super Rugby. These sides have been playing Super Rugby for decades. What is the challenges now of players, especially now that a lot of these players are not capped Springboks, they haven't played overseas? What will be the main challenge for, a side like, I don't know, the Lions going and playing in Ireland, playing in Scotland, or playing in Wales?
Sure. Yeah, I think, Steve, just generally, first up, just the travel in itself and how the tournament will be structured, right? Being away from home, but also in conditions that aren't familiar to you, right? Because going to Europe, some of the guys will be going maybe for the first time, playing in the coldest weathers that they've ever played in. But more than that, they'll be traveling for, I think, about a month at a time. Yeah. So that is a lot of time away from home in miserable conditions, right? And just the adapting, right, in terms of your preparation and how you go about that. Game time, those sort of things you can work out. Sometimes you've played in cold weather, rainy weather, but I think that the biggest challenge is just going to be that psychological, being able to adapt to general conditions off the field in terms of your preparation, just where you're staying, and just being able to take care of that. But I think it's a fantastic opportunity for the guys. I think it can only do good for SA Rugby, right? Having guys being able to play in different conditions. Now when we travel Europe, it's not going to be a foreign concept where we're worried about the conditions, what's going to happen, because we've got 4 franchises worth of players that are playing there, plus the guys are already playing on overseas. So yeah, even leading further, looking into Rugby World Cup in France, right? It's going to be massive for the guys because they would have played in those conditions, right? It's not going to be now all of a sudden you have to travel a couple of weeks earlier so that you can acclimatize, etc., etc. So, but I think the off the field and having to adapt to the sort of conditions is going to be arguably the biggest challenge for a lot of the guys.
I think it's going to be weird because they're going to sort of go over now in, I think in May is the first sort of games actually in Europe, and you're going to have May, June, and with the likes of Italy, Wales, Ireland, Scotland in May is very different to what they're going to go over in October. So I suppose it'll be quite a nice sort of intermediate where they're going to go where it probably will be a little bit dry, a little bit warmer, as opposed to when they're playing, in December and it is 0 degrees and wet and horrible.
Sure.
But yeah, so I think it will be quite interesting. And I also think that for me, because somebody's saying in the comments there, how different is the weather in the northern hemisphere to that of New Zealand? Look, you get cold conditions in New Zealand. Sometimes you get wet conditions. But I also think when you play against New Zealand sides, it's a very different brand of rugby to when you're playing against, European sides. Playing against a Munster or Leinster is so different to playing against a Chiefs and and the Crusaders. So how much do you think that style of rugby, along with the conditions, but also that style of rugby is going to be very different?
Sure. Yeah, it's listen, I foresee some of the guys, because generally speaking, with our South African teams, I won't lie, our kicking game is not the strongest in the world, right? It's arguably the Blue Bulls, the only side that can claim that they've got a good kicking game. But generally speaking, when you then go to those sort of conditions and you're playing in those sort of conditions, and we've seen it, it's a slower brand of rugby. There's more kicking, more territory, right? So it's going to be interesting to see how the guys adapt to that and trying to sort of obviously try balance that off with the natural flair that us South Africans have, the sort of exciting running rugby. So trying to balance those two, because I don't think we'll be able to run with the ball as much. So there's going to have to be more kicking. But with more kicking, unfortunately, in such conditions, it needs to be accurate. And I'm not sure. South African sides haven't gotten that aspect of the game quite right yet. Just the kicking side, and even if we compare it against the New Zealand sort of franchise, we have this idea that New Zealand teams, it's running rugby, whatever, but they actually kick the most. New Zealand as a national side, even, they kick the most, right? And that's something and an aspect of the game that they've mastered. And I think South Africa is slowly getting there, right? Because even, for example, leading to the World Cup, we were still worried about the aerial game of Mapimpi, of Sibungosi, and those are our top elite athletes. Now, what happens
to
our
free game off after click? Can he tactically kick?
Exactly. So now, if we're worried about our Springbok level players, what then of the sort of franchise players, right? So I think it's going to be good in the long run, but in the short run, we might be found sort of wanting in terms of those critical skills. So the aerial game and also territorial kicking.
Yeah, and we I know that sometimes if you go into New Zealand and it can be very cold and very wet. Back in Super Rugby, you would tour for 3-4 weeks, maybe at a push. Sometimes you have 3-4 away games, and at a max, you would have 2 matches in New Zealand.
Sure.
So as a franchise player, you're playing 2 matches in New Zealand. Now, in the Rainbow Cup, you're going to be playing South Africa, Europe, South Africa, Europe, South Africa, Europe. Italy, France, Ireland, Scotland. So I do think that whilst maybe we've had a taste, I suppose, of those sort of conditions, that we haven't had it in abundance. And as you say, I think we're now you can maybe get away of saying, right, we're gonna play this open-ended sort of brand of rugby like the Lions did, and you can weigh it up and say, well, you know what, we're gonna go to New Zealand for 2 games. If we lose those 2 games, if we're maybe not up to scratch for those 2 games, we can adapt because we're gonna have 7-8 games back in dry Johannesburg at altitude.
Sure.
Whereas now that's not going to necessarily be the case. Every second game is going to be over in Europe, in Italy, or in Ireland, or in Scotland, or in Wales. Sure. So you can't afford to just sort of play one brand of rugby and say, well, you know what? Well, I mean, in many ways, it kind of gets rid of the idea of touring. You don't necessarily go on your tour, for those 3-4 weeks. If you're going to be playing a Pro 16, maybe it's a case of you play 15 rounds. 7 of those rounds, or let's say sort of 5-6 of those games are going to be overseas. You're going to be doing a lot of traveling in between that. So
100%.
It will be a lot more. It's going to be, in many ways, you can play almost as many games in Europe as you are down here. And I also think what's quite important is that even as Springboks, you play 1 game in New Zealand a year, you play 1 game in Australia a year, you play 1 game in Argentina every year for the Rugby Championship. But we play at least 3-4 games in an outgoing tour every year. Sure. If you look at World Cups, we're going to be there are going to be more European World Cups than there are going to be in the Southern Hemisphere.
100%.
We've got France coming up. We had, England a couple of years back. We had France before that. So we play more rugby in Europe than we do in New Zealand and Australia. So I think it's very important for us to be able to understand how the conditions are. And also you look at the Springboks and you look at the Japan, the World Cup, and how physical we were and how tactical we were. It wasn't necessarily. There were moments where it was quite a nice, expansive game, but we didn't go over there deciding we're gonna outflare everybody else. I mean, Rassie Rasmus said in Chasing the Sun, he said, "I'm gonna take a massive pack over there and we're gonna bully them."
Sure.
So, South African in terms of athletes are made to play this sort of European style. Obviously, we've got the pace, we've got a little bit of flair, but I think there's so many players that are just made for a European competition.
Yeah. No, 100%. And I think, Steve, you also mustn't forget the fact that this Rainbow Cup is happening in a COVID, right? During COVID, which, when you go on tour, it's nice to get out, be able to see the sides and to do all of those things. And I'm just wondering how much of that the players will be able to actually do under the conditions in which, we're sort of operating in. But, as you said, our rugby games, even at under 9 level in South Africa, are physical. So the physical side of the game is definitely going to suit us, and I think there we'll definitely be able to contest, if not be better than most of the European sides. Again, it's just that tactical kicking, that know-how and having different options in terms of just kicking, when to kick, where to kick, etc., etc. I think that's what's going to be important, and will sort of determine whether we win most games or we lose most games generally across the teams.
Yeah,
it won't be an issue with it.
Yeah, as Scott Graham says, all about it's you have to approach the game in a completely different way. It's not just you're playing in a weird Cape Town. It's a whole different type of rugby.
Yeah.
So I personally I think it's gonna be very interesting. I think it's gonna be and I think it's weird how I think COVID's almost gonna benefit us in a certain degree, in that the teams will get a taste. They'll get a taste of the Rainbow Cup. They'll get 6 weeks of, we're gonna have a little short competition, Rainbow Cup, go and play out there, and then come back and have a preseason, and September, October, right. Now we're going full steam ahead, long-term Pro 16 proper thing. So I don't think we would have had that. I think that if it wasn't for COVID, I think we would have probably, been a bit sort of nowhere. Would have probably had a bit of a domestic competition now, maybe, and gone, right, well, we'll have that British and Irish Lions series, and then we'll sort of go to Pro 16 in October. So really enough, I think in many ways, because the schedule was it's just hit out the park, we managed to be able to say, right, well, we'll play over December, January, February, we'll have this preparation series, we can now have a taste, and then we can go sort of full steam ahead. But looking at some of the comments, so Two Fresh Mac is saying, what are you expecting from our teams in terms of performances? I think it's a very good question. So I think let's talk about what are we expecting from all the teams? What are we expecting from these sides to go over and do? And which teams do you think are you expecting the most from? Not just in terms of having the best players, but in terms of being able to adapt the best to the conditions and be able to sort of match up these sort of teams.
Sure. I think, fortunately for us, in South Africa, I think the one team that I'm sort of worried, unfortunately, Steve, is your side, the Lions, because when we look at the pack, they have a relatively sort of lightish pack, right? Well, I know we've got very big boys in the up front there, and the props and all of that, but also when we then also look at the back line, how will Alton play in those conditions is going to be interesting. Is he going to be able to play his natural game? And we know how central and how key he is in terms of what the Lions generally are trying to achieve, right? So, but when I look at the Blue Bulls, when I look at the Sharks and the Stormers, they've got a very good base in terms of having a very powerful, big pack, right? And that is going to be central to everything that's sort of, we're going to try to do over there. I'm a bit worried with the Stormers, the backline in particular, because again, when I look at the type of player and the style that they like to play, it's very difficult to see them being able to play their natural game in those conditions. But if you look at the Sharks and the Bulls, I think they've got a backline, solid, big men who will be able to do the physical side of things, but also equally they've got sort of the talent and killer instinct, if I could put it that way, to sort of put teams away. And obviously it does help that the Blue Bulls will have a Mornay Steyn who's been there, done that, knows exactly which areas and sort of the styles that the different teams play. And I think it's going to be a fantastic test for Cohen Bosch, as I'd imagine he'll be the sort of pivot for the Shark side. So I'm definitely expecting our sides to do very well in that competition, because it's a forward-dominated game, and by virtue of that, I think we are blessed generally in South Africa with big ball carriers, big physical men, and that's the side of rugby that we love, the physical side. So it's good ingredients for us to do relatively well in that competition, generally, in terms of all the teams.
And I think a good point that Sean O'Farrell says is a fantastic contributor to the channel. And one of the reasons why I think that, as for the Lions, I think that we're in big trouble. He said the one thing in the Northern Hemisphere is defense is stronger and the attack is built on the defense. I think it's very true. And that, I think, for me as a Lions supporter, is that I look at my side, I look at the side, and I think it is a side where if it's dry and if it's an open game, you've got some players, you've got some brilliant handling, and there's some very good flair players. But tactically, when it comes to, can we just defend a line for 10 minutes? Can we just get out of jail, kick down, hit a set piece? I think that's where they've really struggled.
Sure.
And And I mean, some of my favorite players are really flair players. I mean, you think of something like a Wandisida Similane,
Sure.
he's quick off the mark, he's got fantastic handling, he finds a gap. It's quite different, if you're playing overseas and it's wet and you're saying, right, listen, we need you to play crash ball. He's not a crash ball.
Yeah.
It's
100%.
not Andre Esterhuizen smashing up in the middle or something along those sort of lines.
Sure.
And I think, as you say, I think Alton Yankee's going to play a big role. And look, I think he has matured a bit in the last sort of years, and his kicking game it's had to sort of improve. But you look at the way the Bulls have put their team together, and it's almost, I mean, you almost wonder if Jake didn't know.
Yeah,
that
100%.
Not that, I mean, he only could have came in the middle, but I mean, even the Bulls themselves to have brought back. First of all, to bring in Fourie de Pre into the coaching setup, to bring back Dwayne Vermeulen, to bring back Morné Steyn, to bring back Marcel Coetzee, to bring back Arno Botha, to bring back, even Achille Aplon, and say, right, well, these players have all been in Europe, so we can run onto a side with 5-6 players who have played in these conditions, played against these sides, and second nature to them.
Sure.
Whereas I think I look at the Lions and almost nobody has, and it's such a new experience. I mean, there are players in some of these sides who haven't even played Super Rugby.
Yeah,
that's how new they are to the game. Yeah. And now they're going to go and play in Europe. So it should be a very interesting contest. What is your thought on the Sharks? Because I think that, and we're going to talk about the Stormers as well. Actually, I mean, I don't think we're going to talk too much about the Lions. I think it's a young side. I'm not expecting too much. They must go and do what they must do. But on paper, for me, the Stormers, the Sharks, and the Bulls have everything. Maybe to a less extent the Stormers, but I think their pack's so good.
Yeah.
We'll start with the Sharks. They're built in quite an interesting side. And I wouldn't say maybe necessarily a side which is suited to Europe, because I think look, they're not necessarily the biggest players. And you look at that sort of, I always look at the loose trio. I always think that the loose trios tell you a lot about a side.
Sure.
Bulls, Marcel Coetzee, Arno Botha, Albert Lowe, Dwayne Vermeulen. These are big players.
Sure. Compared
to the likes of Asika Moze-Noche, Dylan Richardson, Nasi Khaleesi, bit more sort of flair, bit more sort of good in the loose. How do you think they will fit? I mean, having said that, they were brilliant in the rain the other night.
Yeah.
Do you think that loose trio and even that side, which does like to play in quite an open, loose game, when it starts getting quite loose, they suddenly sort of come alive. Do you think they'll be able to adapt, or where do you think their issues will be?
Yeah, I think the Sharks, I think, built a very good Super Rugby team. It's going to be interesting to see now if they're going to be able to sort of adapt to the Rainbow Cup sort of European style of play. I think for me, I think the forward pack will be able to look after itself, because, I mean, when you look at the front row, I think it's physical, yes, maybe not, maybe on the more mobile side, in terms of Oxenchair, in terms of Fezzi or Richardson, whoever is starting at hooker. Yes, there are flair players, but I think they also have that physical element to them, right? And I think when I look at the Sharks pack, you've even got JJ van der Merch as one of your locks. I think he's made for sort of the rugby, the rugby that we're going to be playing. It's going to take a lot out of Noche. It's going to be also interesting to see how quickly Noche adapts to sort of those conditions and how he adapts his game. And I think if he can do that, then the Sharks will be in a good position, because I think
he's got Pro 14 experience, which is something I didn't even actually think about.
Sure, no, 100%. I think Sia will be able to look after himself. He loves the dirty stuff, and it'll be interesting to then see who then starts on the other flank. But I think the Sharks are missing perhaps a physical 12. That's what I think.
I mean, I heard rumors about them looking at Rohan Janssen from Rensburg, which for me was a match made. I mean, it would kill me to see it, but for me, it made so much sense. To be able 100%. To replace that Andre Esterhuizen, that hard hitting inside center. Because 100%. I mean, somebody said in the comments, I think it was Two Fresh Max saying Sharks need a hooker, tight head prop to replace Thomas, because John Hubert may relax. I think for me, when I look at that Sharks side, and I think they need a hooker, and somebody said Joseph Dwebe, who I agree would have been a good mate. For me, I think they need a hooker. I think they need a 12. And maybe another tight end. But for me, those are the two sort of positions that are glaringly obvious. A really, really good hooker, because they still don't know who they. The problem is, I think if you had to ask Sean Everett, European Champions Cup final, if we get that far type thing, we start playing the competition, who you starting a hooker, he's going to turn around and say, I don't know. Is it Fez Bate? Is it Dan Jooster? Is it Kieran van Vuren? Is it Dylan Richardson? Same thing at inside centre. Marius Lowe does a job, but he's not Andre Estes, and he's not Damien De Linde. He's not a Rohan Janssen from Rensburg.
100%. Yeah, and we saw sort of how much that hurt the Sharks when Esterhuizen left, because all of a sudden they didn't have that pivot point. They didn't have that focal point to their attack, with Esterhuizen being the one who hits up and then allowing the players to sort of then play off him. So I think that's something that they need to fix quite urgently, because I think if we can get in a physical 12 there, then all of a sudden it's a frightening team, because Mapimpi is coming back. And then if you have Sbu on the other wing, who are just massive physical wingers, and then at the back, obviously, you have your Apelele, who I think, brilliant rugby player, and he shouldn't struggle too much with that European game, because he's very good in the air, and I think he can generally just look after himself relatively well.
Yeah, and I think scrum off wise, who would you starting scrum up with for the Sharks? Because I must admit, I lean towards Jaden Hendricks these days.
Yeah, listen, Jaden, it makes sense even for squad. It's become a 23-man game, right? So if you playing in Europe, Jaden Hendricks is a better tactical kicker than Sanele, and it then makes sense to then introduce Sanele when the opposition is tiring. That's when he can pick up the half gaps. That's when he can pick up the tempos. So I think just in terms of the balance of the sides generally, I think it makes sense to have Hendricks having the first crack and then Sanelo off the bench, right? Because of the sort of contrasting styles that the two players play.
Yeah, I've been very impressed with Jaden Hendricks. I remember watching him for the SA Under-20s, and I thought this is something quite special. But the way I think, Sanele Humber was untouchable last year in the Super Rugby before the break. But I think since the sort of comeback, I thought that it took a while for Sanele to come sort of get back to his position, and I thought Jaden Hendricks had a couple of opportunities. I think him starting in the Currie final spoke volumes as to how much they rate them. So I think the Sharks are always a side which, they've got the players. They've got the players.
Yeah.
And I'm very keen to see it. I think Seekalise is a fantastic fit, and I can't wait for him to get back up to some decent form. So I'll leave the Bulls for last. If we go to the Stormers, for me, obviously the biggest thing is the fly half. What do you do with the fly half? You can't put Damien Willemse there. We've seen in the last couple of weeks, Willemse at 15 has been a whole different game, a whole different player.
Yeah.
But we did see an impressive performance from Abner van Rooyen over the weekend. Yeah. And then you've got Kate Voliter, for me, who I think is very talented but too young. And then you've got Team Sweel, who's solid but probably nothing special.
Yeah.
I mean, do you think if they could sign one player, do you think it'll be a fly half?
Yeah, I think the unfortunate thing with the Stormers is Galant getting injured, right? Because I honestly think Willemse was starting to show signs of a good fly off. I think the issue with Willemse has always been the case that he hasn't been given an opportunity to settle in a position, right? And there's always this going debate and discussion, is he a 10, is he a 15? But I think 15 naturally allows him to play his more expansive game. But I think he's more than good enough to wear the 10 jumper. And I think for the Stormers, when Galant comes back, you obviously want Damien Willemse and Galant to be on the field at the same time. So everyone fit at the Stormers, clean bill of health. I think Willemse plays 10, Galant plays 15. That's sort of how they'd go. But as things stand, definitely, Team Sweel, Cade, for me, Team Sweel will be good for the experience. I think he knows the conditions. So off the field, he's going to be critical and vital. But in terms of what he brings, I haven't been convinced. I mean, I loved Team Sweel from school. He was one of the first fly-offs, high school sensation, YouTube, stepper, flair. But I haven't seen none of that since his return. So I think it's an issue that's what the backline in general at the Stormers, a lot of players that you're unsure of, that may be a bit too light. But it's going to be interesting to see how they sort of adapt.
Yeah, I don't know. I'm still so sketchy with the evidence. I worry that And even when you look at the school highlights, he's somebody that loves to run with the ball, got a really good step. I sometimes wonder if he would be all right as a 12, maybe not necessarily in Europe. We need a big hard hitting center, but you watch him at flower half, and you just think that there's so much talent that he just doesn't necessarily know. I don't know. Maybe it's a case if he doesn't quite know yet how to bring himself out. In flower half. Because you watch him at fullback when he's got that. And the thing is, because he's got a very good kicking game, but not necessarily the best one at flower half. And sometimes when he doesn't have that pressure and he can sort of float into those pockets of space, it seems to enjoy a lot of that sort of thing. So, look, he's going to get an extended run at fullback. When Jake White was saying he should come to Bulls, I think it was going to be frightening if they managed to get him at Bulls and at fullback. I think that Jake White was sitting there talking about a stupidly good backline, but and look, the Storm is packed. For me, I think if you look at all the packs, look, the Bulls obviously is huge and very dominant, but I think that Storm is pack also has the potential to be made for Europe. I mean, if you got a World Cup winning front row, you've got a lot of experience, you got a lot of options at lock. I'm a big Salman Murat fan. JD Schickerling's been around the block, and then when you start adding P. Steph to toy. Jean Augustus might not be there for long, but he's also somebody who, for me, is made for Europe. Do you think that pack will be able to sort of mask maybe a backline which might not be suited to the conditions?
Sure. I think the sort of whatever Stormers, their game plan needs to be centered around their pack. It's that simple. I won't lie, though, I'm a bit worried with the loose trio. Perhaps, especially when we look at the options that we have off the bench more than the starting options, right? Because as you said, Augustus will be there. Peter Steph, if he stays, Augustus won't be there for long as well because he's moving overseas. Then all of a sudden, you've got Peter Steph's younger brother there. You've got Namakaba. You've got very inexperienced potential players with a lot of potential, but aren't necessarily experienced. But I think we've also seen that sort of player leave South Africa and go make it big in Europe. Yeah. So possibly making that transition to Europe will be beneficial, where it's a slower game, where it's more physical. Your Van Rooyens, maybe that's when they'll be able to come alive rather than the open sort of running, quicker style of rugby. But definitely the pack is going to be central to whatever the Stormers are trying to do. And I mean, they've got the experience. The front row is frightening, and as you said, the locks, young, definitely sort of the second tier full Bok and higher honors, definitely.
Do you think a change of coach is needed?
I've said that for a while now. I love Dobbo. I really do. And I think he's a
very likable guy. I think that's the biggest issue, is that he says all the right things. You can just see he loves it and he loves being involved. But I'm still struggling to see sort of the identity. He hasn't been able to create a style of play and an identity for the Stormers for so long. So I think just make him one of the coaches. He can run the institute or whatever the case is, because I think he's got very good player management skills, right? Which is it's valuable. That's massive, especially in the sort of professional space now with mental health and all of that. So it's very important to feel generally look after, and I think he does that well. But yeah. I think we definitely need a change of coach down there. And any recommendations? Are there any sort of coaches that you think go around that you think would be a good job?
See, that's a difficult one, Steve, that I have to think about a bit, for a bit of time. But I'll get back to it if someone sort of pops up in my head.
Do you think somebody like Jimmy Stonehouse deserves a crack at one of these sort of sides?
I mean, he's done a fantastic job at the Pumas, right? He's been fantastic, and perhaps those sort of second tier sort of coaches, even the coach of Greek was. I mean, when you look at the resources, when you look at the resources that they've had and sort of the output results that they've had, definitely I think Jimmy. I think he'd be a very good fit, because he keeps churning out these very good players who then eventually sign for the Bulls and go on to be great rugby players. So he definitely has a good track record.
Yeah, I've always wanted to see him at the top because he did well in the Pumas, went overseas, and necessarily worked out for him, but came back to the Pumas, and already in like the short time, on paper they shouldn't be doing what they're doing, you know. And when they
100%.
almost played the Stormers off the park last year, you sat there thinking, "Cheapers, these guys can do something." So I've always wanted to see him have a crack. I think Harvey Ferry is also another one who's doing quite well. Always difficult because there are and it's interesting because you can get some coaches who have got that pedigree. They've got that sort of Springbok coach or top coach sort of pedigree, and you've got some coaches who are made for that sort of second tier underdog. I will get the absolute best out of this sort of player, but maybe when they're in a squad with world class players, you know, might not be able to manage the personalities or that type of thing. So it's always sort of interesting. But I tend to agree. I do think that the Stormers need to look at something. Fish Max saying that Eddie, a lot of stories now popping up. But if Eddie Jones were to get the sack from England, does he come back to the Stormers?
Yeah.
I just don't see how they can afford him. To be honest, I've got no idea how they've managed to afford to keep Seth Troy, although it's now come up said that he was supposed to leave. They've now Francois Herbert signed another contract. Damien Willems has signed a contract. This is a union with financial issues.
Yeah.
You know, running it everywhere. So I don't know how they'd be able to begin to afford to bring Eddie down.
Sure.
But a lot of issues with that union. I'm just glad that they've made a move to Cape Town Stadium. Hopefully it's a bit of a new start and they can get on with it. Now, the Bulls are in a bit of an injury crisis. Albert Lowe, Dwayne, Honor Buerta, Marcel Coetzee, it's always an issue. Stedman Gans, lots and lots of injuries in that side. Yeah. Do you think that with these injuries, because I think, to be honest, if they've got their best squad, they walk into the Rainbow Cup and they say, cool, us and Leinster are the two favourites, and maybe Munster.
100%.
Do you think with these injuries, they still go into the tournament as favourites?
I think the sort of the positive thing for the Bulls is that they've rekindled that winning culture. Right. And I think that's just massive for any union.
Yeah, winning's a habit.
Winning, exactly. Winning is a habit. So they'll definitely be going into that tournament, 100% confidence that they could win, because I still think, even with all the injuries, I still think they've got a very good pack. But more importantly, they've got a solid 9, 10, and 12 combination that, and I think that's where Jaden Hendricks has just been. He's been sensational.
I can't speak more about him. I cannot actually believe how good he's become at it since I said that.
He's incredible. So you've got that. You've got a Mornay Steyn who's going to be able to dictate play, get them playing in the right position. Even when you look at the reserve, Chris Smith is a very physical rugby player who's going to be good in those conditions, right? Obviously, you'd want a Stedman Gans to be there, but I think the Bulls have got plenty of options, even at 13, to sort of be able to fill that void until obviously Stedman comes back. But I think they're in a good position. I honestly do.
And I mean, interesting comment in there. Who do you think should be the starting scrum for the Bulls? I mean, you've got. I think they've still got Ivan van Zyl for a bit, but they're mostly Emrose Papier, Zach Burger. Who would you back?
I'd go Papier. I think he deserves an opportunity, right? But also equally, when we look at the conditions, again, same chat with Sanele and Hendricks. Play for play, out and out, Sanele is more talented, right? I think, at least. I think. Play for play, Papier is more talented than Zach, but I've been very impressed with Zach. His tactical kicking is a very good kicker, which then becomes important in those conditions, and you can always then introduce Ambrose and he can kick it up a notch. So in terms of squad balance, most likely you're looking at Zach and then Papier, right? But if you're obviously trying to out and out play your best 9, if that's the chat, then Ambrose, I think he deserves a fair
He's just
crack.
so long overdue, isn't he, to just be backed as the number 9 and just say week in, week out, you were going to play. I've always been, for years, when Fat de Klerk went, I said, how are the Lions not jumping over Ambrose Papier? He's making Springbok squads off the bench of the Bulls. He's just never had the opportunity. For many years, I preferred him to Ivan van Zyl. I think in the last 100%. Year, I've been much more impressed by Ivan van Zyl. But I think before that, I kept saying, I don't understand why Ambrose is being sort of stuck on the bench. But I must admit, I've been very impressed with how easily Zach Burger's just sort of slotted in at the Bulls. It looks like he's been playing there for months.
It suits his type of game. So it's,
and we know he's a leader. He's captaining the Greek, so it's always nice to have those sort of personalities.
100%.
Right, so we're going to sort of the last 10 minutes. So I think if we had to make a very bold prediction here, how far do you think these sides can go? So for the Lions, I would be happy if the Lions, I think that on our day we can beat Stormers. And I think if we really pitch up, we can push. I think we can push the Sharks. If we play well, we can push the Sharks in South Africa. I think when we go overseas, I'd be happy with one win, to be honest. I don't know who we're going to play. We haven't been concerned. So as the Lions, I'm sitting there saying if we can get 3 wins, I'll take that as progress. What do you think are some expectations for the 4 sides?
Sure. I'm expecting the Bulls to sort of push all the way, push for the title. I think they'll be there, and I don't know in terms of the format if there's going to be playoffs or anything like that.
I think it's a straight. It's 2 pools and then a straight final. No, I think it's only one big pool, top 2 sides, straight final.
Okay, top 2 sides, straight final. Yeah, so I would expect the Bulls to be there, to be definitely top 2, make the final, and the Sharks. I mean, upper table, Stormers. You never know. That's the thing with the Stormers and the sort of the personnel that they have at the moment. They're quite up and down. If they pitch up, they can push for the top positions, but equally, they're very erratic at times. It's sort of the personnel. So it's very difficult to predict outcome for the Stormers, but I expect the Bulls and the Sharks to definitely place high on the table with the Bulls making the final.
Yeah, I tend to agree. I think the problem again, much like the Stormers, I think the Sharks. It all depends. What Sharks are we talking about?
Sure.
Are we talking about the Sharks who got pumped in Johannesburg in December, or are we talking about the Sharks who took the Bulls as long as they did in the Currie Cup final?
Sure.
The Sharks that bumped the Bulls last week. I know there's a second team side, but it looked like a whole different side.
Yeah.
Also a side which just consistency hasn't always been there, but when they play well, it's a damn good team to watch.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I think, look, I'm hoping at least one side can get to the final. I think that would be a nice sort of introduction. I'm very interested to see how we go against the Irish sides. I've seen rumors that the Bulls are supposedly going to play Leinster, which would be cool, and hopefully, Sharks can play an Ulster or a Munster or even an Edinburgh type side. But and then, so this is the last opportunity for players based here to put their hands up for Springbok selection.
Yeah,
and I think we're going to see a very similar squad to what we saw in the World Cup. I don't see Rassie Erasmus changing too much, or we don't have time to experiment. But do you
100%.
think there are any players who impressed enough during the Currie Cup Super Rugby Unlocked that Rassie's going to say, well, let's see if they have a good Rainbow Cup, we can find space for them in the squad?
Yeah, I think there's obviously Francois Louw's position is up for grabs. I think Van Staden, Ntsila have definitely, those two, they've put their hand up. Obviously, Ntsila now is not going to have an opportunity to play in the Rainbow Cup, so that might sort of bump him out of the picture. But yeah, I don't see too many changes from sort of the main Bok side that we saw at the World Cup. I'm just a bit worried about the amount of game time that the players would have had, because we've just had Snyman come back from injury. Pollard is coming back from injury. So Peter Steff hasn't played rugby in the longest time. So these are critical players to sort of what the box is about, and they haven't played any rugby, right? And perhaps that could present an opportunity for the box to have an extended squad that you will then start looking at your Lows, your Eldrick Low, but he's also injured now, unfortunately. But I think there's an opportunity when we look at the sort of the loose trio in terms of a couple of guys picking up their hands and possibly, obviously gaining a call up to the box side.
Yeah, I mean, I think for me, it's if P. Steph the Toy doesn't play a Rainbow Cup, can you pick him for the Springboks?
How?
Can you sit there and say this guy hasn't played rugby in a year? He's going to play his first game against the Lions. If they're lucky, maybe they release him to the Stormers to play that game. But I don't see how you. I mean, look, we're talking about the World Player of the Year in 2019, but how can you justify picking him if he hasn't played? And if he's not playing, then suddenly, as you said, we have to bring in a whole new player. And there's no Francois Lowe to just come in.
Yeah.
So, I mean, does somebody, is it an Ulrich Lowe or, Vinicius Tuka is playing quite well, or you're looking at Jean-Luc Dupre from overseas, a couple of their players sort of stepping up. I think it will be quite interesting. I think there's about 3, maybe 4 sort of play or positions or slots maybe that might still be available. I also think Pollard's a very big call. If he doesn't get Rugby under his belt, what do you do? And then, because Rusty was always quite adamant during the time, well, Alton Yankees is my number. He's my second choice number 10. He's my understudy for Pollard. But do you then maybe say, maybe we go France Steyn at 10? Kieran Bosch has been playing really well. Are you going to suddenly back him against the Lions? I think he's got 1 international cap.
Yeah.
So it becomes quite interesting.
Yeah.
I think it's going to be quite.
It's a tricky one. It's a tricky one, Steve. And I think it'll be, for me, if it doesn't play, if these guys don't play within the next sort of month, month and a half, I think you are doing a disservice to the team having them in, right? You can definitely have them as part of the team, part of the squad, the knowledge that they bring and all of that. But I think it becomes tricky. It's one thing not playing for a couple of months, but to not have played rugby for a year plus at a professional level, then you are moving into very dangerous territory, in terms of just the physical side, and will they be able to, to last? And it brings in those sort of questions.
I think fly half is the most interesting one, because I think over the past 3-4 years you can't argue that Alton Yankees has been next to Monje part of the form fly half.
Sure.
But with the game plan that Springboks want to play, does Erasmus cheat and say, well, you know what, I can bring Moe Steyn back in for 3 tests.
Sure.
I know what I'm getting from him. I'm going to get that tactical. I'm going to get that goal kicking. Or does he risk it and say, well, Kieran Bosch? Or does he stick with sort of original and say, no, I back Alton, even with the sort of style we want to play, I think he can do a job. If Pollard isn't fit, who do you think we go for?
Sure. I think it's Alton. I would personally go Alton. I mean, I love Alton, so it might be a bit of a bias.
We love the flair. That's our problem. We like the flair. We like seeing that creativity.
Sure, no, but I think we saw Alton that he can control the game. He has a physical 12, right? We saw it with Rohan when Alton was the best 10, out and out for 3 seasons in a row in Super Rugby. So I think he has the ability. It's just a matter of who you're pairing him with. And if you've got on his inside, you've got a Faf that he's played with, and you've got Damien Dialinde.
Oh, we lost Chongs. I think his battery might have died. We're coming up on the hour, so we'll pretty much call it there. Unless he comes back in the next 30 seconds. But so I mean, let me know what you think in the comments in terms of fly off. If Pollard isn't injured, what you'd be going in there. But quite a nice little chat for the last sort of hour. Still so much we can speak about. So we'll definitely be having more conversations as the sort of the weeks go by as we prepare for the Rainbow Cup, which is scheduled for the 24th of April. So before you log off, please do smash a like on the video, subscribe if you are new, and we'll be very much. We'll be back very soon. Thank you very much for watching. My name is Stephen. It's always been a pleasure, and I will chat to you very, very soon.